Mean girls taunt the shy one. Her covert talent left them speechless. Clara Bellwether had always been the kind of girl who felt more at ease in the background than commanding attention. At 21, she carried a modest air that made her blend easily into most settings. Her slender build, hardly reaching 5 feet 4 inches, together with her habit of wearing baggy sweaters and faded leggings, gave the impression of someone who wouldn't bother a fly. Her hazel eyes, often shielded by wireframe glasses, rarely looked directly at people she didn't know. She had recently arrived in Oak Haven Acres, a blue-collar area where everyone seemed to know everybody else's history except hers. The local library on Elm Avenue had become Clara's sanctuary. She'd taken a temporary job there, shelving books and assisting with computer help, hoping to accumulate enough funds to continue her studies. The building included a reading room, a small study area, meeting spaces, and a children's section where neighborhood kids gathered after classes. Clara favored the late evening shifts when the place was mostly deserted, letting her work quietly while listening to audiobooks through her headphones. What nobody knew about Clara was that she had devoted the last 7 years of her life mastering classical ballet. Her mother, a former dance instructor, had urged her to learn the art after they'd relocated frequently throughout her youth. She had achieved advanced certifications in various styles by 15 and had spent the following years perfecting point work, partnering, and choreography. Her slight frame had actually proven to be an advantage in performances, enabling her to move with remarkable grace and execute difficult steps effortlessly. But Clara had made a firm decision to leave that aspect of her life behind when she moved to Oak Haven Acres. She wanted to begin anew, to be perceived as more than just a dancer. The problem began 2 weeks after she'd started working at the library. Brittany Hayes, a 23-year-old with perfectly manicured nails and a reputation for spreading gossip, had appointed herself the unofficial leader of a group that loitered around the library most afternoons. She stood nearly 5 feet 8 inches tall, with styled blonde hair and a constant smirk that suggested she thought most people were beneath her. Her 2 loyal followers were Ashley Price, a thin 20-year-old who laughed obnoxiously at Brittany's jokes, and Tiffany Green, a heavier girl with bright makeup who seemed to communicate mainly through eye rolls and aggressive whispering. Clara first drew Brittany's attention when she was organizing return books in the fiction section. She'd been moving silently between the shelves, her head down, when Brittany deliberately blocked her path. "Hey, bookworm," she called out, loud enough for others to hear. "You always creep around like you're ashamed of something." Her friends instantly joined her, forming a barrier of intimidation that made other library patrons glance over uncomfortably before quickly looking away. Clara had simply smiled politely and tried to walk around them, but Brittany moved to block her again. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart. What's your name?" When she whispered her response, barely audible, Brittany tilted her head in an exaggerated manner. "Sorry, what was that? Can't hear you over all that charm." Ashley and Tiffany erupted in laughter, and Clara felt her face flush with discomfort. She managed to get past them and continued with her work, but she could feel their eyes watching her every move. The pattern established itself quickly. Brittany and her friends would position themselves wherever Clara was working, making remarks about her clothing, her work performance, or her apparent shyness around them. They called her Ghost because of how silently she moved and how quickly she disappeared when they approached. During her breaks, when she sat alone reading in the break room, they would sit nearby and make loud comments about introverted losers and people who think they're too good to socialize. Clara's internal battle was constant. Every element of her training urged her to respond, to show them exactly what she was capable of. She knew she could have Brittany stumbling in seconds, could execute steps that would leave her questioning everything she believed about grace and poise. But she also knew that the instant she revealed her abilities, her new start would be over. She would become the dancer girl again, defined by her talent rather than her intelligence, her compassion, or her aspirations of becoming a children's librarian. The teasing escalated gradually. Brittany began accidentally bumping into her when she carried stacks of books, causing her to drop and scatter volumes across the floor. She would then offer fake apologies while her friends giggled. They started hiding her book cart, forcing her to search for it while they watched and made comments about her treasure hunt. Once they rearranged all the chairs in the meeting room she was supposed to prepare, then complained to the manager about her slacking when she was late finishing the task. Clara's manager, Mr. Henderson, was a kind man in his 60s who seemed unaware of the power dynamics playing out in his library. When Clara tried to allude to the problems she was encountering, Mr. Henderson would smile and say things like, "Oh, those girls are just having some fun," or "You'll fit in once you get to know everyone better." The other staff members were either too busy or too intimidated by Brittany's group to intervene. Clara began to feel utterly alone, trapped in a situation that was becoming worse by the day. The breaking point arrived on a Wednesday evening in late October. Clara had been working at the library for almost 2 months, and the harassment had become a daily occurrence. She was reshelving books in the children's section when Brittany and her friends approached, but this time something felt different. Brittany's usual smirk had been replaced by a more malicious expression, and both Ashley and Tiffany looked unusually excited. "Hey, Ghost!" Brittany called out, her voice echoing across the quiet area. "We've got a proposition for you." Clara continued shelving, hoping they would lose interest and move on, but Brittany grabbed the book cart, forcing her to look up at her. "See, we've been thinking. You've been working here for what, 2 months? And you've never once joined us for coffee. That's not very friendly." Clara tried to pull the cart back, but Brittany's grip was firm. "I'm not really into coffee," she said softly. "I prefer to be by myself." The words came out shakier than she intended, and she immediately regretted showing any indication of weakness. Ashley laughed and moved closer. "Come on, Clara. Don't be such a stuck-up prude. We're trying to be nice here." The words stung her like a slap, and Clara felt something shift inside her. Nobody had ever called her that before, and the casual cruelty of it made her fists clench involuntarily. Tiffany, who rarely spoke, decided to contribute her own thoughts. "Maybe she thinks she's too good for us. Maybe she needs to be taken down a notch or two." Her voice carried a threatening undertone that made Clara's survival instincts kick into high gear. Brittany released the cart and stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her skin crawl. "Here's what's going to happen, Ghost. You're going to come with us to the parking lot, and you're going to show us exactly how grateful you are for this job. Maybe if you're really nice to us, we'll put in a good word with Mr. Henderson about your work ethic." The implication was clear, and Clara felt a knot form in her stomach. She looked around the section, hoping to see another staff member or a witness, but they were alone. The exit seemed impossibly far away, and Brittany's friends had positioned themselves to block her escape routes. "I need to finish my work," Clara said, her voice barely audible. She was stalling, trying to think of a way out that wouldn't require her to reveal her talent. Everything in her background screamed that this situation was about to escalate beyond words. Brittany's expression hardened. "Your work can wait. We can't." She reached out and grabbed her wrist, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "Now stop being difficult and come with us." Clara's training kicked in automatically. She could feel her posture adjusting, her balance shifting, her muscles preparing for action. But she forced herself to remain still, to project the same helpless energy she'd been exuding for months. "Please," she said, letting her voice tremble, "I don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," Brittany said, her grip tightening. "You've been asking for trouble since day one with your attitude." She began pulling her toward the exit, while Ashley and Tiffany flanked them like guards escorting a prisoner. Clara's mind raced through her options. She could break Brittany's grip in a dozen different ways, could disable all three of them before they realized what was happening. But doing so would mean abandoning everything she'd tried to build here, would mean accepting that she could never truly escape the dancer identity she'd tried so hard to leave behind. They were halfway to the exit when Clara made her decision. She wasn't going to let these women hurt her, regardless of the consequences. She had spent too many years learning to protect herself to become a victim now. But she also wasn't going to reveal her abilities unless she absolutely had to. "Wait," she said, stopping abruptly. "I'll do whatever you want, but not here. Too many cameras." She gestured toward the security cameras mounted throughout the library. "Mr. Henderson reviews the footage every week." Brittany's eyes lit up with what she clearly thought was victory. "See? I knew you could be reasonable. Smart girl." She released her wrist and stepped back, her posture relaxing slightly. "Ashley, go start the car. Tiffany, make sure nobody followed us." As her friends moved to follow her orders, Clara felt the familiar calm that always preceded her best performances settle over her. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened, and her awareness of her surroundings expanded to include every detail of the room. She was no longer the scared librarian they thought they were manipulating. She was a weapon that had been masquerading as a victim. "Actually," Clara said, her voice suddenly steady and clear, "I changed my mind." The transformation in her tone was so complete that Brittany actually took a step back, confusion replacing the malicious confidence on her face. "What did you say?" Brittany's voice carried a warning, but Clara could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes. Something about her posture, her expression, or her energy had shifted in a way that her subconscious recognized as dangerous. Clara removed her glasses and placed them carefully on a nearby shelf. Without them, her hazel eyes seemed larger, more intense. "I said I changed my mind. I'm not going anywhere with you." She pulled her hair back into a bun, her movements precise and purposeful. "But you're welcome to try to make me." Brittany's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You think you're tough now? You think you can just—" She lunged forward, reaching for her with the same casual violence she'd shown dozens of times before. Clara sidestepped her grab with fluid grace, her movement so quick and economical that Brittany stumbled past her and nearly fell. She didn't counterattack, didn't strike back. She simply wasn't where she expected her to be. The ease with which she'd avoided her grab sent a chill through the room. "Brittany." Ashley's voice was uncertain as she watched her leader struggle to regain her balance. "Maybe we should just—" "Shut up!" Brittany spun around, her face now completely red. "She got lucky. Hold her down while I teach her some manners." Ashley looked uncomfortable, but moved to comply. Tiffany, however, seemed to sense that something had fundamentally changed. She remained where she was, her eyes fixed on Clara with a new wariness that hadn't been there before. Clara stood perfectly still as Ashley approached, her hands loose at her sides, her breathing calm and controlled. When she reached for her, she moved like water, flowing around her grasp and ending up behind her before she could react. She placed one hand lightly on her shoulder, and she froze as if she'd been struck by lightning. "Ashley," she said quietly, using her full name for the first time. "You should leave now. This isn't your fight." Her voice carried an authority that made her shiver involuntarily. Ashley tried to turn around, but Clara's grip, while appearing gentle, held her in place with iron certainty. "Brittany," she called out, her voice higher than usual. "Something's wrong here. Something's really wrong." Brittany's response was to charge at both of them, her hands formed into fists. Clara released Ashley and stepped into Brittany's charge, her movement so smooth it looked like choreography. Brittany's punch sailed harmlessly past her head as she dropped into a perfect plie, swept her legs, and sent her crashing to the floor with a resounding impact that echoed through the library. The silence that followed was deafening. Brittany lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. Ashley had stumbled backward until she hit the wall, her eyes wide with shock. Tiffany stood frozen in place, her mouth hanging open. Clara straightened slowly, her expression calm and controlled. "I tried to avoid this," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "For 2 months, I've listened to your insults, your threats, your pathetic attempts to intimidate me. I've picked up your messes, ignored your harassment, and pretended to be the helpless victim you wanted me to be." Brittany struggled to sit up, her face a mixture of rage and confusion. "You crazy bitch, I'll—" Clara's foot appeared beside her head so quickly that she didn't see it coming. She hadn't touched her, but the speed and precision of the movement made it clear that she could have. "You'll what, Brittany? You'll continue to threaten and intimidate someone you thought was weak? You'll keep pretending to be tough when you can't even handle a girl who's 6 inches shorter than you?" The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in for all 3 women. This wasn't the scared librarian they'd been tormenting. This was someone who moved with the fluid precision of a trained dancer, someone who had been holding back for reasons they couldn't fathom. Brittany scrambled to her feet, her pride wounded more than her body. "I don't know what kind of ballet movie garbage you think you're pulling, but—" She swung wildly at her, putting all her weight behind a haymaker that would have seriously injured most people. Clara ducked under the punch and drove her elbow into her solar plexus with surgical precision. Brittany doubled over, gasping for breath, and Clara followed up with a knee strike that sent her stumbling backward. She hadn't hit her hard enough to cause permanent damage, but the message was clear. She could have. 7 years, Clara said, circling Brittany as she struggled to breathe. 7 years of training, 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. Classical ballet, modern dance, jazz, and character work. I've danced with partners twice your size and half your talent. She paused in front of her stance relaxed but ready. "Did you really think I was helpless? Or did you just want to believe I was?" Ashley found her voice first. "Jesus Christ, Clara, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you fight back before?" Clara's expression softened slightly. "Because I wanted to be more than what I could do with my feet. I wanted to be judged by my character, my work ethic, my kindness. I thought if I could just be normal, just be peaceful, maybe I could leave that part of my life behind." She looked around the room, taking in their shocked faces. "But you wouldn't let me be normal, would you? You needed a victim, and you decided I was perfect for the role." Brittany had finally caught her breath, but her posture was completely different now. The swagger was gone, replaced by the careful movements of someone who had just discovered they were outmatched. "Look, we were just messing around. We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Clara's voice cut through her excuse like a blade. "You meant every word, every threat, every attempt to make me feel small and powerless. The only thing you didn't mean was the part where you thought I'd never fight back." Tiffany, who had been silent throughout the encounter, finally spoke up. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't know—" "You didn't know what?" Clara's question was sharp, demanding. "You didn't know I could defend myself? Does that make your behavior acceptable? If I had been the helpless victim you thought I was, would your actions have been justified?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. None of them had an answer because they all knew the truth. They had chosen her precisely because they thought she was defenseless. They had targeted her because her quiet nature and slender build made her seem like an easy victim. Clara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "For 2 months, I've watched you 3 terrorize not just me, but anyone you perceived as weaker. I've seen you make fun of the elderly patrons, gossip about the teenage volunteers, and intimidate the staff into looking the other way. You've turned this place into your personal kingdom of meanness, and everyone just accepts it because confronting you seems too difficult. She moved closer to Brittany, who instinctively stepped back. But here's what you never understood. Strength isn't about beauty or popularity or the ability to make others afraid. Real strength is about choosing to be kind when you have the power to be cruel. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about using your abilities to build others up rather than tear them down. Brittany's face was pale now, the reality of how badly she'd miscalculated becoming clear. "We can work something out," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "Maybe we all just got off on the wrong foot." Clara shook her head. "No, Brittany. We got off on exactly the foot you intended. You wanted to establish dominance, to prove you were the queen bee in this environment. The only problem is that you chose the wrong person to establish that dominance over." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them all freeze. Mr. Henderson's voice called out, "Clara, are you still in there? I need to lock up the library." The older man appeared in the doorway, his eyes immediately taking in the scene. Brittany on the ground, Ashley pressed against the wall, Tiffany looking like she'd seen a ghost, and Clara standing calmly in the center of it all. "Is everything all right in here?" Mr. Henderson's voice carried concern and confusion. Clara looked at each of the three women in turn, her expression making it clear that their next words would determine how this situation unfolded. "We were just having a conversation about respect and boundaries," she said evenly. "I think we've reached an understanding." Brittany nodded quickly, eager to avoid any official consequences. "Yeah, just talking." "Everything's fine, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. "Well, I need everyone to clear out so I can lock up. Clara, can you finish the reference section tomorrow morning?" "Of course," Clara replied, her voice returning to its usual soft tone. As the group began to disperse, she added, "Brittany, Ashley, Tiffany, I hope you'll think about what we discussed tonight, and I hope you'll make better choices moving forward." The message was clear. This was their one chance to change their behavior voluntarily. The alternative was a demonstration of exactly what Clara was capable of when she stopped holding back. Over the following days, the dynamic at the library shifted dramatically. Brittany and her friends no longer gathered in the children's section where Clara worked. When they did encounter her, they were polite to the point of being deferential. The casual meanness that had once defined their interactions with others seemed to have vanished overnight. Other staff members began to notice the change. Mr. Henderson commented on how much more peaceful the environment felt. The elderly patrons seemed more relaxed during their reading groups. The teenage volunteers who came for after-school programs were more engaged and less likely to cluster defensively in corners. Clara, meanwhile, had undergone her own transformation. She no longer moved through the building like she was trying to be invisible. Her posture was straighter, her eye contact more direct. She still preferred quiet to chaos, but she no longer radiated the energy of someone who was afraid of being noticed. The real test came 2 weeks later when a new group of troublemakers tried to establish themselves in the teen section. They were younger than Brittany's crew, probably still in middle school, but they carried themselves with the same entitled arrogance that had made the library uncomfortable for so many people. Clara was organizing displays in a nearby storage room when she heard the commotion. The new arrivals were harassing an elderly man who came to the library every day to read newspapers and socialize with other seniors. They were making fun of his hearing aid, moving his newspapers and laughing at his attempts to ignore them. The old Clara would have found a reason to stay in the storage room, would have convinced herself that it wasn't her problem. But the woman who emerged from that room was different. She moved with purpose, her stride confident and direct. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the teen section. "Mr. Johnson, is there a problem here?" The teenagers turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from amusement to dismissal. The apparent leader, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Mind your business, lady. This doesn't concern you." Clara smiled, but there was something in her expression that made the smart ones in the group take a step back. "Actually, it does concern me. This is my workplace, and Mr. Johnson is under my protection while he's here." The teenager laughed, but it sounded forced. "Your protection? What are you, some kind of superhero?" "Something like that," Clara replied. Her voice remained calm, but her posture had shifted almost imperceptibly. Anyone who knew what to look for would have recognized the stance of someone prepared for performance. Brittany, who had been watching the exchange from across the room, stood up abruptly. "Hey!" she called out to the teenagers. "You guys should probably find somewhere else to hang out." Her voice carried a warning that made the newcomers look confused. "What's it to you?" the leader shot back, but Brittany's expression was serious, in a way that suggested she knew something they didn't. "Trust me," Brittany said, glancing at Clara, with something that might have been respect. "You don't want to push this. Find another place to be tough girls." The teenagers looked between Brittany and Clara, trying to understand the dynamic they'd stumbled into. The smart ones began to back away, but the leader was too proud to retreat without making a point. "I'm not scared of some librarian," she said, puffing out her chest. "What's she going to do? Hit me with a book?" Clara stepped forward, closing the distance between them in 2 fluid strides. She didn't touch her, didn't make any threatening gestures. She simply stood there, her presence somehow filling the space around them in a way that made the teenagers' bravado falter. "I'm going to ask you once to apologize to Mr. Johnson and leave," she said quietly. "After that, I'm going to stop asking and start insisting." The teenager looked into her eyes and saw something that made her swallow hard. Whatever she found there convinced her that backing down was the smart play. "Sorry, old man," she mumbled to Mr. Johnson, then jerked her head toward the exit. "Come on, this place is boring anyway." As the group shuffled toward the door, Clara called out, "And girls, if you decide to come back, I suggest you remember what respect looks like. It'll make your visit much more pleasant." After they left, the teen section buzzed with quiet conversation. People who had witnessed the encounter were clearly impressed by how Clara had handled the situation. Mr. Johnson approached her with grateful tears in his eyes. "Thank you, dear," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Clara helped him back to his chair and retrieved his scattered newspapers. "Nothing would have happened, Mr. Johnson. People like that are cowards who prey on those they perceive as weak. They fold the moment they encounter real strength." Brittany approached them, her expression serious. "Clara, I owe you an apology, a real one." She looked around the room, making sure others could hear. "What we did to you was wrong, not because you turned out to be tough, but because it was wrong regardless. I'm sorry." Clara studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity. What she found instead was genuine remorse and something that might have been admiration. "Apology accepted," she said. "But remember, the real test isn't how you treat people who can fight back. It's how you treat those who can't." The conversation that followed was unlike anything that had happened at the library in months. People who had been afraid to speak up began sharing their own experiences with bullying and intimidation. Staff members who had felt powerless to intervene began discussing new policies and procedures. The elderly patrons talked about feeling safe and welcome again. Clara listened to these conversations with mixed emotions. She was proud of the positive changes, but she also knew that her carefully constructed anonymity was gone forever. She was no longer just the quiet librarian. She was the person who had stood up to the bullies, who had changed the entire culture of the library through a combination of skill and courage. As the weeks passed, Clara found herself settling into her new role as an unofficial protector and mediator. She still did her shelving duties, but she also found herself mediating disputes, offering advice to troubled teenagers, and serving as a bridge between different groups that used the facility. Mr. Henderson, who had initially been clueless about the harassment Clara faced, proved to be a strong ally once he understood the situation. He implemented new policies about respectful behavior and made it clear that the library would be a safe space for everyone. He also offered Clara additional responsibilities that took advantage of her natural leadership abilities. The most surprising development was the relationship that evolved between Clara and Brittany. She began approaching her for advice about dealing with her own insecurities and fears. She revealed that her mean behavior had been a way of masking her own low self-esteem. Under Clara's guidance, she started channeling her energy into more positive pursuits, eventually becoming a mentor to some of the younger girls who frequented the library. Ashley and Tiffany followed Brittany's lead, though their transformation was less dramatic. They became more aware of their behavior and its impact on others. They stopped participating in group intimidation and occasionally even spoke up when they witnessed others being mistreated. The real victory, Clara realized, wasn't in the moment when she had demonstrated her dancing skills. It was in the weeks and months that followed, as the culture of the library shifted from one of fear and intimidation to one of mutual respect and support. She had proven that true strength wasn't about the ability to hurt others, but about the wisdom to know when and how to use one's power. Clara's mother called her one evening, and she found herself telling her about the recent events. "I'm proud of you," she said after she finished her story. "Not because you can dance, but because you chose not to dance until you absolutely had to. That's what real art is about, using your talent to protect others and yourself, but never becoming the aggressor." As Clara hung up the phone, she looked around her small apartment and reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had come to Oakhaven Acres, hoping to leave her dancer identity behind, to become someone defined by kindness rather than grace. What she had discovered was that true grace and kindness weren't opposites. They were complementary forces that could create something beautiful when properly balanced. The library had become more than just her workplace. It had become a place where she could be fully herself. The quiet, thoughtful woman who preferred books to conflict, but who was also capable of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She had learned that running from her abilities was less important than learning to use them wisely. Clara smiled as she prepared for bed, thinking about the teenagers who now came to her for advice, the elderly patrons who felt safe because of her presence, and even the former bullies who had learned to channel their energy into more positive pursuits. She had wanted to start fresh, to be seen as more than just a dancer. In the end, she had become exactly that. Not by hiding her abilities, but by demonstrating that true strength meant knowing when to dance and when to show compassion. The transformation was complete, but it wasn't the transformation she had expected. She hadn't become someone different. She had become someone whole. Character count 30,617.